A whistle can be a flashback to elementary school. I don't know if I can handle that.
Lucky?
Sandy's. All the cloud infrastructure provision.
For anybody on the edge, if someone could take over my Gatto camera setup right there, if it falls over, just try to put it back up. If it falls, it falls. So to start out, I apologize for the dad joke of a name, but I have recently become a dad, so there's really nothing I can do about it.
Congrats.
Thank you. Tiny intro to me, I'm a software developer. I'm really interested in data pipelines, full stack skills, and like a lot of you guys, I'm super fascinated by machine learning. Not to hipster y'all out, but I was into it before it was cool. I almost became a self-taught data scientist, and then I followed someone trying to become a self-taught data scientist, and software was easy. And I really like software, and really connected. But for this talk, what is this one? I wanted to talk about agriculture. And it's not a very sexy topic. Normally, we have this weird thing we do, especially as urbanites, of kind of thinking we've mostly solved the food problem. We don't hear about it a lot. There's not a lot of billion-dollar exits out of ag tech. But it's supremely important, supremely interesting. And I think, even if you're not interested in going into ag tech after this talk, which makes sense, you probably all have jobs and lives, what's happening in ag tech right now and why it's exciting offers a lot of lessons for the machine learning space and the AI space. And I want to talk about those. But first, so again, we're urbanites. This is usually how we think about agriculture. I'm ashamed to admit it, but I think about agriculture this way, even though my cousin has a ranch and my mom is a PhD food scientist. It's still so easy to just ignore because it's been around for so long. But really, this is a graph of what's going on in a farm. This is a corn farm, and this is highly oversimplified. So when we talk about machine learning and solving complex problems, it lends itself to this interesting thing. It's a lot of moving parts. Different climates, different soils types all make a huge difference. And it's not a problem we've solved as much as we think we have. Also, one thing I think that's really cool about agriculture is it's old. Like, you're solving one of the oldest problems in human history. I'm going to talk a little bit about LLMs in this talk. I like LLMs. I'm not anti-LLM. They're very important. They're the reason the hype train is where it is right now. But one of my big takeaways is that AI and LLM are not the same thing. It's a much broader and more beautiful field. And solving the problem of language is certainly really old, but it's also very broad. This is an ancient problem. This tool actually goes back 4 million years. It's an artifact they found that they believe was used in early agriculture. This is a very specific ancient problem. And I think if we're going to show as practitioners the promise of machine learning, this is a great problem to be looking at. Also, on the off chance you hear about more than just an awesome paycheck, world population is still expected to grow. If you're a 90s kid, you might remember a lot of fear about overpopulation. That's come down, which is good. But even given current growth trajectories, we need a 70% boost in food production. So it is a really relevant problem. And there's a lot of opportunity that people don't seem to be aware of. So just using the techniques we know now, not even the ones that machine learning are going to give us in the future, we could get the same yield. And I'll use that word yield a lot. That's just how much food we get. That can be out of animals or plants. But we can get the same yield with a 20 to 30% drop in water use. I'm not going to go over all these statistics, but the food waste, the lack of yield, the input to yield ratio is massively important. As it turns out, fertilizers, pesticides are bad for basically everybody. Pesticides we all know and we're all a little scared of because they're literally meant to kill something. Fertilizers too, though. Nitrogen can contribute to global warming in a lot of ways, and it's one of the most common things used. Again, using current practices, there are estimates all over the place, but some of the yields could skyrocket if farmers were just doing what we already know is good. And yeah, the sequestration and the decrease in greenhouse gases, massive if we actually do this right. And, assuming you might care a little bit about money, that's okay. This is a massive market. So inputs to a farm, 20 to 30% of the operating cost. It's $500 billion market in the US. Globally, you can imagine it's ginormous. Lowering inputs, getting the same yield or even better yields, and as well as more nutritious products, it's a massive problem, and it's something machine learning can help a lot with. It's already about a $9 billion industry. It's expected to go way up. This, I'll skip over most of this, but this is also just how much we spend on food globally. Even in the rich countries, you can see that we spend around 10% of our income on food. Bringing that down even further is a massive thing in terms of economic security, and also for the poorer countries, you're spending as much as 60% of your entire personal budget on food. Bringing that down would be a massive win for everybody. I know sometimes we like to talk about UBI in the ML space. Before we even get there, though, making food incredibly cheap or almost free is something I think that could be within the future if we train these models right and take the right actions. Another thing about ag tech, we think of farmers as fairly low-tech people, and they are. This is not like an unfair stereotype. However, we're living at a time with drone technology, indoor farming, where the industry is already ripe for change. They're already doing interesting things, and they're seeing the product. And I wanted to harp on that a little bit because AI right now is in every industry, and it's a hype term, right? And that's going to go away. It always goes away. People forget about how effective it was or never made it effective in the first place. Farmers, for lack of a better word, don't like bullshit enough for that to happen, so they don't care about the hype. But once you deliver value with a model and a product, you have them hooked, and they'll stay hype or no hype. That's a big opportunity as machine learning practitioners for us to have a market that says, hey, we actually want to see value delivered. We don't care about hype. So, we have a few goals with machine learning models in agriculture. Use less inputs, pesticides, fertilizer, water, get more yield, pretty much food. And then I put sequestration in parentheses. Carbon sequestration in farming is its own talk, but I will mention it a little bit here and there, and machine learning does it later. And it's already happening. So I'm going to have two broad categories of machine learning applications in agriculture, image stuff and not image stuff. It's a massive oversimplification, and they also do work together a lot. But I'm going to start with the image stuff because it's a little simpler, and it's also one of the more proven areas. So, See & Spray, you might have heard of a company called Blue River, which was acquired by John Deere. They came up with an image recognition technique, to recognize weeds from other plants. They put this onto the back of tractors, allowing the back of these tractors, so these spray pesticides, and the pesticides sometimes aren't that bad for the existing plants, so the normal approach can be to just spray the whole field, depending on what kind of crop you're going. Obviously really wasteful, obviously gets into our food system, and over the long term, this is actually terrible for the next harvest. But farmers have to think about this harvest right now. This technology using image recognition picks up different species of weeds and precision sprays them. So it's like having a bunch of people that can actually spray the weed. 75 to 90, it depends on the case study you read. Again, agriculture is a very low bullshit industry, so they're very clear about what they actually got. But there are some farms that were able to reduce their pesticide use by 90% to get the same yield, just using this technology. Little camera picks out a weed. Plantix is another interesting company I came across in India, trusted by 1.4 million farmers. This is for disease detection, so this is actually a toy problem that's kind of common in image recognition. You might have heard of it, but it's huge. If I'm a small plot farmer in India and I can just take a picture of my crops without bending down and looking at every single leaf, it saves me a ton of time, and I can intervene early if there is a disease in my crop. Take it out, do whatever. Okay, so this is image stuff plus. What I just showed you is image recognition techniques, convolutional neural nets usually, really shows like strong iterative value. It's the most proven stuff, it's not the most exciting stuff. This is the more exciting stuff. So we already have a few proven concepts here, although it is more the Wild West. There's a huge Norwegian company called Yara that does agricultural analytics. And I'll get into the techniques of how they did it in a minute. they were able to see a 7% yield increase and a 14% reduction of nitrogen in the soil. That's because when you farm, there's actually a right amount of fertilizer. It's not more is always better. But for farmers who are stressed out, even who've been doing it a million years, getting that nitrogen level perfect is really hard. And there are machine learning operations that can really help with this. CropX is another one. 40% reduction in water usage with a 10% yield increase. That one kind of blew my mind. I didn't get enough time to actually dig into how they modeled it. But it's exciting, and the link's up here if you're interested. Okay, so let's get to the fun part. Let's get to the actual machine learning stuff. Going back to our first category, this is image stuff, which usually involves weeds. Sometimes it involves disease detection, like I mentioned. Weeds is kind of the main thing. As you can imagine, Blue River and John Deere have not open sourced their model yet, which is a bummer, but there's a very similar study out of Australia that I was able to find, actually in a much more difficult environment. So there were some scientists from, I'm not going to remember the university, but that went to Australia specifically because the climate was changing so quickly. It's a very difficult area to do weed detection for a million reasons they list in the paper. And they were still able to pull it off. So if you're familiar with the architecture ResNet 50 that I'll get into in a minute, basically using a really good convolutional neural net, they were able to take a situation in which the data was super heterogeneous and still nail the weeds. And they came up with a product results that were pretty similar to See and Spray, like 90% pesticide reduction, 95, 96% accuracy of we actually hit a weed that we want to hit, in multiple species. So that's convolutions for the most part if we're talking technique. UNets, especially because we're doing image segmentation, UNets are pretty popular in this area. What I noticed with a lot of all of this stuff, even the bigger picture stuff, is the concept of refeeding residual nets was really popular across a different bunch of techniques. So taking the same data, giving it back to the neural net, which kind of makes sense, at least in weed detection, because you're really trying to pick out specific leaves and use that to determine the species. ResNet 50, if you're interested, this is the model architecture that they had the most success with. Some other technologies that I'm going to be more familiar with. So common objects in context, if you've heard of this is a huge data set. I want to say they have an SDK, but was really useful in a lot of the papers I read in this area. OpenCV, as you can imagine, we're doing computer vision. There's even a library called PlantCV that has a lot of support. It's a very loud project right now, where it's OpenCV, but really, really focused just on plants. Okay, so all the other stuff. This is yield projections, field insights, and precision agriculture. Certainly the idea of spraying an exact weed is also precision agriculture, but this gets into a lot of stuff. So if you remember that graph earlier in the presentation, it's like a million different inputs and outputs. Getting all of those exactly right using a bunch of data sources, really cool area. We've been doing precision agriculture for longer than you might expect. This is a soil map from 1850 something. We've had a lot of consciousness around the soil matters, the climate matters when it comes to farming. It's this ancient, old school problem. And we've known more for a lot longer than you might think. But it's still a problem. I'm pretty sure that's the Canadian Prime Minister, I'm not 100%. But it represents a lot of loss. So this is $1 billion market in Canada alone, and we're just talking about wasting nitrogen. So it's more than just the weeds, I think, is the main point of the slide. But our data sources are super heterogeneous. We're mixing a bunch of different stuff. We're taking in data that is not used on, well, it's used on other problems, but not like traditional LLM data or traditional software data. You're doing a lot of stuff to actually get here. So this is satellite data. There's also, I shouldn't call it satellite data because drones actually take a lot of this, but it's remote sensing data. That's a picture of the planet. And where the power really is in this data is that we don't just look at RGB like we do for traditional image recognition. We look at a hyperspectral plane. So that includes infrared, that includes layers of light the human eye doesn't see, but that actually have a lot to do with the different chemicals that go into farming. A lot of this data is actually publicly available. including hyperspectral data, multispectral data. You can just pull it down and start messing with it. And it's used in a lot of machine learning contexts. So what this really means, and bringing this back out to like what are the lessons from machine learning in general, this data is powerful on its own, but there's also a lot of index calculations you can perform. So taking the ratio of infrared to green, for example, is a really important thing to determine plant health. How these different layers interact with each other is something we're trying to capture in the models, and if you can get that right, the results are phenomenal. This is just another example of an index. Again, we're taking like all these different spectrums, essentially throwing them on top of each other, dividing them, adding them. You can use this as an input to a neural net or another model and get fantastic results. So there's a lot of this public data available. I wasn't able to put up all the sources. USGS is going to be one of the best ones. Yeah, it's really, in terms of data availability, the remote sensing data is really incredible. AgML would be really shocked if you heard of it because it's a tiny project that me and 2 other people I ran into on the internet are working on. But if this space is interesting to you and you're either just getting started to train a model or you're interested in the data engineering side like me, come talk to me and we might be able to get you started. It's a very small open source project right now. But the point is there's a massive amount of data available. Also, Python's amazing at working with this. There's a ton of different libraries that allow you to perform these transformations. I found them incredibly easy to use back when I was working with geospatial data. It's just not a very intimidating field. Let me back that up. It's a field that seems intimidating because it sounds like such an intense layer of science. We're doing hyperspectral data on the Earth. But getting started is surprisingly easy. You pip install one of these, you can start messing with the data, visualizing the data way faster than you might think. Also, if you know anyone at Rasterio, Shapely, or Spectral, please get them to make a logo because none of them have a logo. GeoPandas is really cool. So when it comes to the actual machine learning here, what kind of models are we using? LSTMs were really popular for these projections, especially yield projections. Predictability is a huge thing for farmers. So going back to this concept of trust, if you can just give them a sense of what yield will be, they can protect themselves financially, they can figure a lot of things out, and then move on to the different techniques like the respreading of nitrogen and stuff. LSTMs combined with convolutions in a way that I didn't totally pick up on were really popular, but you can imagine if you're going over a bunch of raster data, convolution probably makes sense. Another thing that really struck me though is the prevalence of traditional data science techniques that don't ever tell anyone who's not an AI this, but aren't considered AI by some people. There's still a lot of basic statistical techniques like a regression or a random forest model. These have incredible power in terms of prediction. Were used a lot before the hype train jumped on, and that's where a lot of these current ag tech companies come from and ag intelligence companies come from, usually just using these models. So that lends itself to model ensemble. That is still a very experimental field, unfortunately. There's not that many examples yet of this knocking it out of the park. But taking a random forest to pick out specific variables, putting that into a neural net, bringing it back out. XGBoost was really popular. This is from a study I found that showed XGBoost was at least as good as a CNN LSTM model in terms of predicting output, predicting yield. And this is not, I don't know if people are familiar with XGBoost, this is not a neural net. This is a different machine learning technique. It's a lot more interpretable, and that's why it's been popular in the ag field. I would be interested if I had enough time to look into it, and hopefully I will someday, to do something like adversarial. So to take XGBoost, something more interpretable, put it against CNN, LSTM, give it different sources of data, see where they disagree, and then try to drill down on that disagreement with other models. But it's a really exciting place. Model ensembling is, I think, really underrated. It's hard. It's an easy thing for a junior to say that it's underrated because I'm not on to do it. But model ensembling is, what was I going to say about it? It's underrated, especially in these fields that we move out of the LLM space when we're talking about heterogeneous, like many different fields of data. ChatGPT 4.0 they call it multimodal. I consider that very similar to ensembling. It's not the exact same technique. That's where a lot of this field is headed, and I just think it's really exciting. Also, to clarify, I'm a junior in machine learning, but I'm a senior now. So. Yeah, so ensemble. That's a hyper simplistic example. The potential is really cool. Cool, so that's a really good place to transition and take us a step back. Again, I'm not anti-LLM. LLMs are good, but there does seem to be, especially amongst management and people who are less technical, a perception that AI and LLM are the same thing. To me, in this project, I really started to see the LLM as kind of like the front end, the JavaScript of the machine learning model. So a lot of folks in ag tech are interested in chatbots to record data to then go do this other modeling on. If an agronomist doesn't have time to take pictures or like type into a keyboard, it'd be a lot nicer if they could just start recording conditions using a chatbot. But then that chatbot can feed that data into so many other things. Neural nets are not machine learning, they're a subset of machine learning. They're the most promising for sure. I'm also not anti-neural net, but the applications of things like XGBoost and the interpretability were really huge in reading about this topic. This is a big one. It's like we can't get away from the replacement talk when it comes to machine learning, but it's trying to speak here as a cold-hearted capitalist, not even as a good guy. It just doesn't make sense to have these models replace people. They work differently. They think differently. That's what makes them good and strong. And especially in agriculture, I would hope everyone in this room would be terrified to hear that we don't have any more farmers, it's all robots now. And they're handling all of our food. But also, like, to zoom out on that a little bit, it's also, the less you anthropomorphize the model, we were just talking about this, the more you're going to understand the model's insights. So rather than trying to build a droid that is a second farmer and farms along with you and you have some weird relationship with, you build a droid that gives you insights that you as a farmer don't have the time or ability to pick up on. And you turn that into a conversational augmentation piece. I think that most applications of machine learning look like augmentation if they make any sense. Partially because, again, these machines do not think like people. At least we think they don't. We don't understand how the mind works, so technically they could. But what we're discovering with LLMs, and especially every other model that takes in heterogeneous amounts of data, heterogeneous styles of data and lots of data, they think differently. They operate differently, and that's a good thing. That's why they're a powerful augmenter. This is not Midjourney, but Microsoft's new thing. I told it to make a droid helping a farmer and augmenting and get that concept across. I thought this one came out pretty well. This one was a little. I really liked it at first because I like the Star Wars model of augmentation because they like talk to the droids, but they never treat the droids exactly like people. They're just droids. But there's a bunch of little creepy R2s in the background that kind of made it put that one in place. So probably the more controversial take, maybe not the more controversial take, but it is really important. If we're going to augment humans well, and this is really a loud theme in ag tech, especially because the farmers are not into the hype, they're not into the tech, why a model does what it does is becoming increasingly important. This concept of the black box, I think, is going to sell less and less, especially as we go into older industries, but also in current industries. Machine learning models are going to fall on their face, and we're going to need to know why to properly augment people and keep these models trusted and popular. So there's some really cool projects around this. And some people, even in the machine learning space, haven't heard of, like SHAP. That last one is interpretable machine learning, I think, and that's out of Microsoft. I'll leave you explain. 3 really cool projects, and there's more in this space of going into neural nets, as well as other models, alternate models like XGBoost, and pulling out, okay, why did the model tell me what it told me? Really important stuff. If you've never, has anyone here seen The Office? You don't remember the Wayne Gretzky thing? Okay, never mind. Data is huge. This is obvious, but it bears repeating constantly because especially non-technical stakeholders seem to forget it. If you don't have quality data, the model spits out nothing. It doesn't help you. Agriculture is the same way, but even more so. Just another lesson learned that I think bears repeating constantly. And understanding the underlying data, so when I put together those indexes with the hyperspectral data, why did a particular one tell me what it told me? Critical. These are companies. This is a small smattering of companies in ag tech that I wanted to give a shout out to. They're all doing at least something in machine learning, and I was able to pull something at least from a blog post. I got to meet with the CEO of Manolin. They're local. Tortuga is actually local as well, and Bountiful is local. These are startups. If you follow these companies on LinkedIn, the algorithm will take over and throw you more companies if you're really interested in the ag space. Really cool companies though. Yeah, so if you are interested, come talk to me about AgML. I can shoot you a link. I also made in the MLOps Slack, which you should be a part of. I made an agriculture and ag tech, I think that's what I call it, channel. And we can go talk about it there. I think that's it.
Are you currently monetizing AgML?
No, we're, you won't even see my name on a commit yet. You'll see it on issues. I've complained about it, so that's good. It's currently being supported by UC Davis, but when I say supported, it's like one little server, so it's very baby, but it's starting to grow a little bit. My full-time job is at Find Help. They're not even funded other than by that little grant from UC Davis. It's very small project.
First off, I want to commend you for what you're doing. I feel like all of the biggest names in tech are either trying to emulate stuff people have done or get people to click on ads. And you're actually doing something that's beneficial for humanity. So thank you for that. Yes, for clap. And I was curious, first off, so happy I met someone else who actually knows what X-ray is. That library, it's basically labeled tensors, so pandas in however many dimensions you want. I've been looking for a project to improve proficiency in it, and this seems like a great little fun project to get into around it. I didn't see any mention around like cross-pollination research, crop strain development. Is that an area for ML and AI?
I bet you it is. I was not able to find a lot of like deliverable results in those areas yet, but we're talking about a complex system that requires a lot of data to make proper decisions. So cross-pollination stuff probably is. I will tell you the genome tracking, anything involving machine learnings and genomes, very popular in ag tech. To kind of make Franken food, but also to make it more nutritious and to actually plug things in. So short answer, yes. Long answer, I don't know how much traction it has yet, but it's absolutely related.
So thinking about the market for adoption for all of these products, what do you see as being a preventative force for farmers to adopt some of these products?
So it depends on a variety of factors. I talked to like the folks at Bountiful. It's like a tiny Series A company, single engineer. And a couple of others in terms of the barriers. It can be multiple, so it depends on the farmers they're going after. Small farmers think a lot different than big farmers. Like I said, it's showing and demonstrating value in an iterative fashion. Because farmers, pardon my French, they don't have time to fuck around. Like they are tired, they are exhausted, they're waking up at 4 a.m. If you give them something and say, hey, enter this extra thing and do this extra work, you're going to get very little. So I honestly, one of the biggest things is just the user interface. And again, that's where kind of LLMs can come in, the chat bot or something like that. The other thing is just, and this is a barrier that's being overcome, like I said at the beginning, but really showing the results to people, especially the big companies. They can fly under the radar. They don't really have to deal with the hype beasts like Unilever or John Deere's another huge one. But when they see value delivered, then they're going to put it in their systems. So I'd say those are probably the major factors. That and making sure there's quality data. For hyperspectral remote sensing data, you can get some really awesome stuff. Like I said, for the actual image data, farmers can get a little picky. Not farmers even, but the tech companies will get a little picky and a little private with their data. So pushing forward data sharing would be really helpful, finding a way to do that.
Thank you for giving the talk and sharing your knowledge. If I am very new to the ML space, and let's say my goal is to understand all the things that you talked about in this presentation. What resources would you recommend?
I mean, to prove I don't hate LLMs, you can ask LLMs to get started. The LLM did a decent out of this. I would say, so I went self-taught as a software developer, and one of the most headachy things is how much there was to learn. Machine learning is even worse. Try to find a problem you find interesting, and then just learn a technique from it. So if you were interested in like projecting yields, or you can also use this for the stock market, go learn LSTM models, which I'm not very fluent in myself, like kind of. But go learn an LSTM model, get it done, and then pull back from, okay, what did I learn, what did I like, not like, and just pick one thing at a time. But focus on a problem more than a technology. That's, I think, something we can all stand to hear pretty much every day. And yeah. And if there's a specific one, there's really amazing YouTube channels I can recommend after this to talk about the underlying math as well as the libraries you need and stuff like that.
Cool, thank you. So,
Oh, go ahead.
oh, I already asked, so someone else can go.
Okay, you go.
So it seems like there's a lot of early players in this space, and the bottleneck seems to be like the few companies that actually manufacture the equipment that would be
Yeah.
using some of this technology. So what is going to be the difference maker for some of these early stage companies to be able to demonstrate like, hey, you should use us for
That is a great
image sensing models, or do you have any thoughts on that?
The first thing, I mean, dumb and obvious, is results, iterative results. You know, you're getting more yield, you're getting more nutrition. The other thing I would say is, I wish I understood the internal politics of the industry a little bit more, but yeah, I do think interoperability, building your platform to be very interoperable and even headless. We're having this right now in healthcare, where there's this resistance to build a headless platform, which is nothing against front-end coding, even though back-end coding is cooler. But you build this headless platform, you stay out of people's way, and you say, hey, this is John Deere, like to the farmer. And the farmer's like, great, I have my John Deere, I can go. So I think the humility to be headless and then to get that information out of interop. It will also depend on the big companies, which is a little scary. Like there has to be a politics of, y'all need to take a risk if you want to see this industry as a whole grow, and if you want to see this industry as a whole be viewed more positively. I don't think people hate agriculture, I just think they're kind of like, whatever. But I think especially like the Unilevers of the world have a huge PR opportunity, that an actual long-term one, not just, hey, I kind of like Unilever more. If they engage with these smaller companies, they get interoperable data going and a lot of research. So yeah, I guess that's what I would say. Design your platforms to be interoperable. That's for everybody on the net. Okay.
Similar to the question that he asked, but I'm a data scientist I've been operating in like text data for the last 5 years, which is super hot because I know all about LLMs. But I think translating that, if I'm passionate, say from a faraway standpoint of being like, yeah, I want to help make agriculture more efficient, it can be really scary to be like, okay, now I have to understand not only how X-ray data works, not only how it looks like, but like so many people have degrees in geology and geospatial imaging, and like what is your advice about like, not even just landing a job, but I feel like there's a disconnect between like loading in some data and looking at it and maybe like running a model in Python, looking at the results, and then actually like having the domain knowledge to land yourself that internship for that job.
I'd offer a few points. I mean, one, language is an area of deep expertise. If you've ever read Noam Chomsky, like we do not give language enough credit for how difficult that area is, and you've still been able to build great LLMs. I would say look at existing models, see what they did right, see what made sense in those particular models and those studies, and then read a little bit about agronomy. It is complicated, but it's not wildly complicated. If you listen to a lot of agronomists, you as the machine learning practitioner really just need to know the fundamentals, and even then I would say that's for like getting a full-time job. And once you understand those fundamentals, you know what I really say is get on the interpretability train with these models and make something simpler, but that you can understand and that a farmer can understand and build that way. Agronomy is not, it's complicated, like it's its own science, it's certainly something, but any other place you apply machine learning can be just as complicated. In agronomy, we've been doing it for millions of years. So again, if you go back to like nitrogen reduction, all your model is doing is trying to say, hey, I don't think there's enough nitrogen there. It's not super hardcore complex. And if you can get your foot in there and start talking to agronomists and learn what they think about as well as farmers, yeah. I think it's just, I think with any technology, with any technologist, the idea that we don't have enough domain knowledge is rarely a blocker. Although we should pursue it more, so I like your question.
I also just want to say the larger points of your presentation, like ML is not LLM, NN is not ML. Please think about the data that you put into the model. Those are applicable across, like I think about that in my work every day.
Great.
And so it's great to hear that echoed.
Garbage in, garbage out. And that's the one, I will say we had a presenter in our product summit for our company who said, oh, my model is better than AI. When you're talking to a non-technical stakeholder, just say it's AI. It's great. But garbage in, garbage out, I think, I have been very surprised as to how much non-technical people get that. They're like, oh, if I don't give it good data, it's not going to do anything. You don't have to know about the middle step, but yeah.
So you mentioned like how farmers, are like, this is the impact I'm in. But then how do you actually measure that? How are you monitoring that? Like, what is the time period? Is it like when the next harvest comes in, or like when they're realizing how much change in like that month they're buying like fertilizer? And like how does that impact like work and that feedback loop work?
Fantastic question. I'm going to hide behind the old it depends. Partially because I don't kind of crazy familiar with all these studies. I read most of them, but partially because it depends on the crop. But it'll usually be harvest to harvest. But it'll depend on the crop. If you're a rancher, it can depend on a lot of different factors. Yeah, it's a great question though, and it's one of the things companies are doing to get in is to continuously measure this. And as soon as it starts diverting, rebuild credibility by figuring out what's going on.
You mentioned you have a background in data engineering or a focus in that. How do you view the data engineering field evolving alongside AI and ML, and what would you recommend to a data engineer to keep up with that evolution?
I mean, it's critical. One of my earliest interactions with an LLM was, hey, I was making fun of it because we all try that, let's be honest. And I was like poking at it and I'm like, hey, I'm sorry. I'm a data engineer, and if you can guarantee my family's safety when the robots take over, I can build you delightful data pipelines. And its response was, deal. It depends on the patience of non-technical stakeholders, it depends on the patience of investors, but with those asterisks, it's critical, it's everything. You don't give a model good data, it doesn't matter how good your model is, including synthetic data. So if you're producing great synthetic data, hypothetically, which is a huge controversy in ag tech right now, if the data doesn't end up in the right place or in the right format, the model's going to explode. So it's absolutely critical. I would like to, so domain-specific knowledge is really cool for data engineers especially. I think you can take this like domain-driven design approach and be like, hey, I just want to understand your domain, turn that into your data models. I think that lends itself to interpretability. Hang out on the ML Slack, keep coming to the community meetings, keep hearing what people are doing. I don't think you have to know the innards of every single new technique they bring, although exposing yourself a little bit to, like I can recommend the YouTube channels I use can be good, even though it's kind of brain nerdy. Yeah, have a couple of areas where you're strong in and just know what the original data is saying and have that in a way that you can explain it to your data science team and empower them. They're not going to expect you to, if your title is a machine learning engineer, they're not going to expect you to know more than what their needs are and to speak their language a little bit. And that's been my experience anyway. It'd be interesting to hear from other people on that after. And they're not terribly hard. Neural nets are just a bunch of if statements. There's a lot. Any other questions? Let's have more pizza and beer.
Real quick, for those of you that don't know,